Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about strings and what they are and how they're used in Java. So what I've done here is I've created a very tiny class called strings example, and I'm doing everything in main because it's just as easy to show off strings here as it is anywhere else. So first question is, what is a string? So a string in some other languages is represented as an array of characters, right? So in another language, hello, the string might be represented like this, right? So I have an array, which this is out of scope for what we're talking about right now, but it might be represented like that, right? Well, Java doesn't really represent strings like that. In Java, a string is actually an object, and we manipulate it by creating objects of type string. So what I've got here is this is a string, so it just says hello, obviously, and the only thing I'm doing is printing that out. So let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and build it and then run. And obviously I get hello down here. Um, so it's pretty simple. Um, Things to know about strings. So a string could also just be as simple as a literal. So I don't have to say hello. I could say goodbye, right? And this is a string literal, so I can run that, and goodbye prints out down here. Um, the other thing to know about strings is that we can actually invoke methods on them. So there's a whole number of methods that I can invoke here. So I'll just do hello.length. So all right, now I can print the length of hello out. Right, so length of 5, and then I got hello. Um, and the other thing to know about strings in general is that they are immutable. So what do I mean when I say that? Well, if I take hello and I want to do a substring, so I'm going to go ahead and invoke the substring method. What the substring method does is it says from a starting index, in other words, give me the index where you want to start in the string. I'll give you the rest of the string until either the end of the string or the ending index that you want. So I'm going to start with an index of 1, and I'm going to go to the entire length of hello. Now you'll notice it's grayed out there, and basically why it's complaining is that there's another version of that method out there, which only takes one parameter, which will do the same thing that I want to do. But that's okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and leave it in there just so it's a little bit more clear. Now, I'm taking the substring of that, right? So what do we think happens to hello when I do that? Do we think it's going to modify hello, or do we think it's going to leave it alone? Well, let's run it and see what happens. All right. It left it alone, right? And so why is that? Well, that's because strings, as I said, are immutable. So once you create one, you can't change it. So you might be asking then, well, if I want to call substring on the string I'm working with, how do I get that back out? Well, the easy answer is you assign that to another string. Right? So now let's run it and let's see what we get from that. All right, now we get hello, a much more British greeting, I guess you could say. The other thing that you probably want to know about is that if you don't assign a value to a string, so this will be a null string, and then you attempt to manipulate it, I'll just do it right here. This is going to cause a problem. See, and it already knows. It already knows that it hasn't been initialized yet. So you actually can't do that. I mean, I can try to do the hammer. Right, now we get a compile error. So you have to have given your string some value before you can work with it. You might see examples where they do something like this, right? so we've given it a value, sort of. Um, we can run this, and let's see what happens. So first thing you'll notice is we got a string index out of bounds. That's happening here. Well, that's because we have an empty string that we've created. So that's not very useful to us. Let's take that out. We'll just pass null string, right? And run it again. And you notice we didn't get an error or anything like that. It's not the same as if that were actually null. That's just an empty string. So this is valid. I don't really recommend doing it though. If you need a new string, I would recommend either just an empty string or actually giving it a value to work with. So there's really two more things that we need to worry about for strings, and that's how do we combine them and how do we compare them, okay? So combining them is done through a process known as concatenation. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that, and then let's just say hello here for now. And then what I want to do is I want to make another string by combining two strings. So let's say like this. Okay, and so I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to say hello, and then I'm going to use what looks like the plus symbol. I'm going to say world. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. And you'll notice down here we get hello world. Okay, and so what just happened? Well, this isn't really the plus symbol when we're talking about strings. That's actually concatenation. And so basically that's a way to take two strings and to produce another string by putting those together. So concatenation doesn't just work with strings. Java will actually try to interpret other types and convert them to a string if it sees that if you're trying to concatenate a string. So I can do this, right? So I'm concatenating these two strings, and then I concatenate this, and then I'm also going to concatenate a non-string value, in this case an integer. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so then obviously we get hello world, a space, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So this is just an illustration that you can build new strings from other strings using concatenation, and you could actually do that with other types too. So Java will try to cast that type to a string. So just be aware of that. It doesn't always work the way you think it will, so based on the type you're using, that may or may not have the desired effect. So that's concatenation. So the other thing we got to worry about is how do we compare strings? Well, I think a lot of folks would try to compare something like this. If they're not used to Java, they might do something like this, right? Let's do this. Come up here. Okay. Okay, so we have two strings, and they both have the value of hello. Okay, so if we compare those, what do we think is going to happen here? Do we think that this is going to let's give it some output so we can kind of see what we're talking about? Let's see. Okay, so I've got a conditional. So what I'm saying is take this string and use the double equals to compare this other string, and if they're equal, then go ahead and spit out it is hello. Okay, and so what do we think will happen? They're both the same value, so they should be equal, right? Well, let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. All right, you'll notice we didn't get any output, and that's because this statement or this expression evaluated a false, which means don't execute this line. Maybe you're wondering why that is. Well, the thing is that the double equals is actually doing more than just a value comparison. It's also doing a reference comparison. So this is creating a reference to a new object, as is this one. So these are actually different references, even though their values are the same. So that means that when we go to compare here, the double equals looks at that and says, oh, well, those are two different references. They must not be equal. So therefore, I'm not going to execute this. So maybe you're asking, well, if that's the case, then how should I properly compare strings? And here's how we do it. So we're not going to use the double equals. We're going to use the built-in equals method on the string itself. And we're going to go ahead and do it like this. Okay. So now let's go ahead and run it and see what that gives us. Okay, so this time we got output. So that's the message we expected. So the thing to take away from this is that when you need to compare strings, you should use the dot equals method on the string object itself and not the double equals, because double equals is doing a reference check and not just a value check. So that's a little bit about strings. So again, strings are objects in Java. You can create them relatively easily. You can deal with literals. There's methods that you could call on them. You can concatenate them together, and you could actually compare them using the equals method on the string itself. So that's pretty much it. That's all there is to strings. All right, thanks a lot.